Hello and welcome everyone to LearningEngineer.com, where we engineer learning for efficiency. My name is Michael Langdon, and today what I would like to do is show you how you can change the style sheet based upon IP address. And just to prove to you that there are two separate style sheets, I did make a change with a button, so this will also change the style sheets with the button click. There's the first one, that's the first style, that's the second style. Okay, obviously one is just, they're both basically the same style sheet. They just switch some, we do switch some fonts and obviously quite a few colors. Okay, so now what I want to do is kind of show you the inside part of this. Obviously the HTML, the JavaScript, and the CSS. So I'm just going to open this here, and this is of course my index.php file. Now I did say HTML, and you're like, what's going on with that? Well, you have to use PHP to basically get an IP address without paying for some kind of service. I tried to find a free service that would give me IP addresses, but I couldn't find any of those services that were free. They will run like a JSON. That's what they do. So you get the IP number through JSON, but I figured I could just use PHP, and so that's what I'm using. So of course this starts with the doc type. We have the HTML, the head, meta characters, title, of course, style sheet change based upon IP address. Then we have my script for jQuery. I like to use jQuery. Okay. And then my script for my JavaScript. Obviously it's called CSS change. And then we have our link to our style sheet. And of course, the important thing here is this guy right here. You need to have an ID for your link ID for your style sheet. Then of course we close our heading, the head part of it, and then we go to the body. And of course I just have some standard containers there. This is a flex box. So if you want to look at that, that's all on the style sheet. Then the important part is we get down to this divider whose ID is IP address, and if you guess that, is this where the IP address is going to be put? You are correct. So what we're going to do is inside this divider container, we're going to run some PHP, and we're going to run this function called getIPAddress. And if you look at this, it's basically pretty self-explanatory. There's a lot of, as you can see, there's a lot of if else if statements, okay? And each one is checking for a certain type of IP address. Now, if you wanted to, you could really get rid of all of this down here and just use this part up here, because obviously the first thing it's going to do is ask the server for the HTTP client IP, okay? And what this part is saying is it empty? Or I'm sorry, is not empty. So it's saying if this is not empty, then do this. Okay. So we're looking for a number to be there. If there's a number there, then it's going to do this little simple action here. It's going to plug this IP address, which is what this gets, into this variable. So this is how you do a PHP variable. It's just a $sign in front of your variable name. It's pretty easy. And then of course there's various types of IPs that it checks for, like if it's got a forwarder, and then it checks each forwarded one to see where it's going and to look for a valid IP address. Okay. Here it checks each one, and what it does is it explodes it so it separates them out. Okay. And then of course it does the same all down here. So we have like a forwarded IP, a cluster IP, a forwarded. So as you can see, and then there's a remote address. So these are generally if like you're behind a firewall at an institution, like let's say a college or a school or a company, these would kick in. If you're just at home, this one is going to catch it. Okay. Now you could look, and that's maybe one of the reasons why you would do this, is because let's say you had students who were at one campus and students who were at another campus, and you wanted it to be personalized to the campus they were at. Then you could have a separate style sheet for that. Okay. And in the end, we wanted to return this IP address variable. And what it's going to do is then it's going to echo that returned IP address. So it echoes the function, but what happens is the function returns that variable IP address, and so that's what gets put into that box. Okay? And as you can see, then there's the rest of the divider and so on. So the first thing I'm going to do is refresh this again. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is just right click on this and click View Page Source. And as you can see down here, here's our divider, and it has an IP address in it, right there. Okay, so now I'm going to close that, and I'm just going to come back here, and we've gone through this. So now what I want to do is go through the CSS change. Of course, if you go to the website and the web page for this, you will see the style sheets, and you can see the difference there. This isn't really about the style sheets. This is about changing the style sheets based upon IP address. So that's what we're going to focus on here. So if you want to see those, they're there. So the first thing we do is we create a variable called IP text. Okay. Now this is jQuery, and what it means is that don't do anything until the document's fully loaded and ready to go. So once the document's fully loaded and ready to go, meaning that PHP at the end of that HTML or that PHP document loads, then this happens, okay? And what it does is this pulls that IP number from the divider, or the div, this pulls that with the div with the ID IP address. Then, of course, it trims it down to make sure that there's no empty space on either side. Then I did have it run to the console log just to make sure I've got a good number. And then, of course, if the IP number is this guy up here, which it's not, it's this guy down here, then do this one. And this is the light style. Okay, and just to prove to you that this works, I can click and there's the light style, there's the dark style, light style, dark style. And this is just a button that's switching them, which is fairly simple. So you get to see both of those. So that's what it does here. And of course, if you wanted to, if you wanted to just look at those three numbers because you're looking for everybody from like an institution or a company, you could also do that. Remember though, then instead of trimming it, you'd probably have to splice it. And of course, then it does this. So this is JavaScript, and it says just document get element by ID. There's our page style ID. And then there's the attribute that we're going to change. We're going to change that href, and then this is what we're changing in that href, and this is what changes it right here. This line, this one line of code is what changes your style sheet. Okay. Now, of course, right down here I have the button one. So if you just click on the button one, basically it says let style sheet default equal pop, and then of course it has you get the element, okay, and then I just check it to see what it is, and then if the style sheet default equals L1 style, then of course you replace it with L2 style, and of course if it's not L1 style and it is L2 style, then we have it come down here and replace it with L1 style. So that's the if-else statement that you need for that. You only really need to check for one, because if it's not the one, it's the other one, because there's only two. So that's how simple this is. And of course, all of my code is on my website at LearningEngineer.com. And of course, the link here is to LearningEngineer.com/examples/IP, capital IP, style sheet. This guy right here. And of course, I will put this link in the description so that you can easily get to it. And that's really all I have for today. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.